folks that are here that have not met you and that maybe never even heard of Tom Sawyer other than back in the book with the straw hat.
Well, that's easy to start out with. First of all, I'm sorry.
You want to fill them in on?
Okay, we'll do the super capsulized version of what happened to me and why I'm sitting here in front of this camera talking to you today. 11 years ago, I had a truck follow me right here in my driveway, and had the truck jacked up with the front wheels off it. The truck at that time weighed about 2 tons, and the truck fell on me and fell right across my chest, right in this area here, and squeezed all the air out of me and made me unable to breathe for a little over 15 minutes in time. Many things took place in the accident, including me having very profound, personalized and private thoughts, such as how degrading this was, that if in fact I die this way, that it wasn't good enough for me. Now, I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean that I was a very good mechanic, and this wasn't fair because it wasn't my fault that the truck fell on me. There were air pockets underneath the asphalt, and the driveway collapsed. So it wasn't my fault, it was asphalt. With that excuse and so on, and with that rationale that I simply had to be where I was and be still, there's a few things that you should know about me at the time. One of which was that 50 pounds ago, I was a national caliber athlete. I was in excellent physical shape, very strong. I was very assured of myself and my abilities. I was, as I mentioned, a good mechanic. I had the ability to hold my breath for over 3 minutes in time. I usually did my own work. It's not that I wouldn't allow anybody else to do work for me, but I was usually, very honestly, the most qualified, including working on my truck. So, I should also stereotype myself a little bit and tell you that at the time I was an agnostic. I had been brought up a Christian Catholic, and in spite of the so-called learning and making my communion and confirmation, around the age of 13, I decided that that was very bluntly just religious stuff, hocus pocus baloney, and that it really had no bearing on my personal life. In other words, very bluntly, I had no personal relationship with any kind of a God. With the truck falling on me, that changed very instantly and very dramatically. And it wasn't just that I almost died. It was very bluntly that I was able to see God and experience that. And realistically, for the first time in my life. Also, I was pretty much an all-American guy at the time. I was 33 years old and married with 2 children. At that time, my son Todd was 10 years old. He was assisting me working on the truck. And as soon as the truck fell, he ran in and called the paramedics. So some of the scientific information we get about the accident was, for instance, it was called in at 7:41 in the evening. And shortly after 8 o'clock that evening, the paramedics arrived at the driveway and rushed up to assist me in my extrication and my survival. During that time, many things happened. One of which was, as I was going unconscious after a couple of futile? Yeah, that's right, futile? I know it's something like that. Futile attempts to ward off the oxygen deprivation and the onset of the unconscious state, where you shake your head no and try real hard. Some intensive thoughts were in my head that it's more important to struggle and hang on and live than it is to just give in and die. And that was at the point where it was physically acceptable or okay to just give in and pass out, have all the pain and suffering and so on like that just go away. And in spite of that, I did care about life. An attitude like that is important the last few seconds of a traumatic experience or a state of disease, especially if it's terminal. And I felt that way, and I was appreciative of the last few seconds in time to struggle a little further. But I did get to the point of unconsciousness, and as I went unconscious, I had the experience of seeing, and when I say seeing, I don't necessarily mean seeing with my physical eyes. It was seeing At least hypothetically, the experience, it felt exactly the same as seeing. And what I was seeing was blotches or flashes of various colors. They were very beautiful. It was very enjoyable. I don't have any scientific explanation whatsoever for what this was or why I saw it in the way that I did, but I first tried to describe it and said that it was all the colors of the spectrum. And then I learned and realized that that includes infrared and ultraviolet. And I still say that it certainly was that. And that I experienced the extreme visual connotation of various colors. And colors such as opalescences, phosphorescences, fluorescences, that of course I have not been able to duplicate, and it was very enjoyable and nice. Well, with it, no explanation as to either exactly what that was or why I experienced it, even 11 years later, the experience went on to just having a state of unconsciousness. I had a feeling of being completely unconscious, everything blank, and nothing to describe at all, and then rather instantaneously having the experience of waking up from that state. And when I say waking up, I didn't get up because the truck was still on me. I didn't necessarily open my eyes or take a breath. I wasn't able to do that. So what we're really talking about is from a physically unconscious state where the last few heartbeats were experienced and my heart was stopped, and of course all the other organs were slowing down to the point, and this experience of absolutely waking up was just my mind and possibly some brain functioning going on. And the perceptions that I had is what I'm describing to you now. Those perceptions were feeling absolutely awake. Everything was vivid and clear. I had the same sensations as being able to hear accurately, see as well as I've ever seen, and I've always had good vision. Even though I'll describe to you paradoxically that there was no I lost my train of thought when a friend just drove by. Yeah, there was a sense of timelessness. I realized that very bluntly there was no such thing as time. And in this timeless state, I had the experience of, for instance, trying to experience where am I, what's going on here, and looking around just as though you would do it physically. It was the same feeling, same sensations as that. Looking around and thinking, what in the world is this? Where am I? And being able to only see absolute darkness. There were no identifiable objects. It was absolutely black, opaque. And with this realization, even though I wasn't frightened by this was still comfortable, the next experience that I can describe to you is having that darkness or blackness just take the shape of a tunnel. Shape of a tunnel is the best description as far as I'm concerned. I've heard other people in the last 11 years say a funnel, a tube, an abyss, various other descriptions, but I like the idea of a tunnel because it's cylindrical. It extends forward, in my circumstance, to infinity. It was ever so slightly funnel shaped, allowing for the depth perception. With this realization and this sighting of this tunnel, I had the feeling that I was moving forward, and it was straightforward, well-balanced, comfortable, and through the center of this tunnel. That forward motion increased in speed, although there was not wind, vibration, sound. There was certainly a visual connotation of the tunnel flashing around me or me going through the center of it. But there were no G-forces like we would normally experience in acceleration. With this acceleration, however, the first empirical piece of knowledge that I gained from this out-of-body experience or near-death experience was that I realized, and I simply realized it, let's say intuitively, I realized that I attained the speed of light or possibly faster than the speed of light. At that time in my life, I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't realize that it was physically impossible. I didn't realize anything at all about Albert Einstein's theories and relativity. And I was not aware of mathematically that it's basically 186,000 miles a second. I knew that it was very, very fast. But more importantly and more accurately, I knew that whoever I was at that time, and I felt as though I was myself, Tom Sawyer and all my character and characteristics, that I was going or functioning at the speed of light. So whisking through this tunnel, the next thing that I'll describe to you is that way off and paradoxically to infinity was this minute little speck of light. That light was very profound. It was the first identifiable object that I was able to perceive or see. So I was eagerly anticipating, what is that? And isn't that beautiful? And with that realization, it was even more profound because that little speck of light way, way off in the distance was very bluntly the most beautiful thing that I'd ever experienced in my life. It was absolute total beauty. It was white. Sometimes we like to dress up white by saying blue-white. Like we try to grade diamonds and such. It was absolutely pure. It was brighter than something that would immediately blind you. It was the brightest thing that I'd ever experienced. Brighter than 100,000 carbon arcs or welder's torches. Various things of brightness that we could measure. It was at least the equivalent in brilliance of the supernova. It was also, other than beautiful, it represented a type of love that I'd never experienced. Now I can use the phrase unconditional love, although I wasn't familiar with that phrase at the time of this accident. As I got closer to it, it's incorrect for me to say that the light got better, because I'm trying to describe perfection for you. Once you attain perfection, you can't get better than that. You can't have something improved. And in spite of that dilemma, it is paradoxically accurate for me to say that it was more perfect, it was better and better. And in the last several years, a realization has come that if you have something that is perfect and you're observing it or you're experiencing it, it can't get any better. But you and your perceptions can get clearer and more accurate. So as I developed a better sense of what it was I was experiencing, that's where I have the sensation or the realization that things got better or clearer and more accurate. There was some type of a deceleration in this tunnel, because the next thing that I want to describe to you is that I was motionless. I was stopped at the end of the tunnel, and I had a realization, let's just call it intuitive again, that behind me was this tunnel. I did not turn around to verify it, say to turn around and look at it. It wasn't necessary. Much more importantly was before me, and then covering the entire vista before me, just totally engulfing everything, was the light. As I approached the end of that tunnel, I realized that the light itself was emanating from outside the end of the tunnel. It was not the very end of the tunnel. It was engulfing whatever the realm was outside this tunnel. And again, that might just be symbolism. It might just be a focused perception onto the aspect of the light. And once that perception is focused accurately enough to perceive any degree of it, then there's no longer the need for the symbolic tunnel or funneling or focusing. I like those phrases. It's interesting. I've never quite told it that way. I think it shines a little different light on the subject. Before me was the light, and instantaneously, and I want to emphasize instantaneously, the light emanated to me in a telepathic way. And, let me first say and get out of the way that very bluntly, the light is God. The light is the light of Jesus Christ, the light of Buddha enlightened. And of course, if you're offended by this Eastern analogy that this man Buddha that I'm saying is also the light and God, I'm not saying that he, the man Buddha, is God. I'm saying that a man who became Buddha and extremely enlightened has passed on and is now in that light, and therefore godlike. That's what I'm describing. But as I first perceived it, I just perceived that the light emanated to me and made me understand that some most profound things, such as, and I'll role play again to describe the dialogue of sorts that I've kind of translated. For instance, the light emanated to me, Tom, you have to be where you are and in the condition that you are, and before you is the light, which is redundant because I was already experiencing that. You have an opportunity, Tom, to perceive or desire or ask any question, any series of questions. And regardless of what the question is or how intensive the knowledge is necessary to even understand a proper questioning, that as soon as you formulate the desire for such a question, that the absolute unequivocal correct answer will be emanated instantly back to you. Now, what I'm describing is a phrase that I've coined, which is very accurate, and it's superluminal telepathic communication. In that it's a telepathic type of rapport, just thought pattern to thought pattern, that functions at or faster than the speed of light. Little loose ends tied together, and this was not just logical deductive reasoning. This is something that I was shown and told as part of the experience. In other words, if you're so inclined to understand anything at all about clairvoyance, it would be a telepathic, clairvoyant type rapport that is extremely pure or functioning at such a speed that is outside the realm of this physical existence and outside time. If you function at the speed of light, you cease to function in what we know as in time. So your perceptions would be at the speed of light, and any kind of dialogue would be not held by the bonds of timelessness or timeliness, and that if you ask something, you can be given the answer simultaneously. I asked many questions, and to capsulize that, just to give you an idea of what would be a question that I would ask. Again, it's incorrect for me to say first question, second question, third question, because you're missing the point of the timelessness and missing the idea behind superluminal telepathic communication. But one of the questions, which in all probability would have been a first, would be, am I okay? And I didn't mean, am I alive or dead, because I'd already experienced my heart stopping and realizing that I was at least clinically dead. In that capacity, I was asking, am I okay? In other words, in God's eyes, am I all right? Am I okay? And I can kind of smile and brag and say thumbs up that for the moment being, at least, that everything was all right. And then the most profound questions, in hindsight of this experience, I would kind of damn myself and say, why didn't I ask for a particular cure to a type of cancer, so that now that I'm here and having had this experience, I could share that with a major university and be able to facilitate something that was not selfish or just about me and share it with the rest of the world. Well, the timelessness of that seemed to be more timely than anything else, in that I was limited as to the degree of questions and so on. I wasn't limited to the type of question, but just the degree of my perceptions of what I needed to know before I went on with this experience. And one of those questions was very bluntly, what about the Jesus stuff? And in that capacity, understanding again that I was an agnostic at the time, but at least curious enough to know, like many people question, come on, all kidding aside, what about that Jesus stuff? I mean, is it real or isn't it? And, some people can have very profound faith, and they can fervently believe and follow Christianity and be a good Christian, and still that little bit of doubting Thomas in them saying, some of the fine details perhaps of who was Jesus the Christ, what is the Christ, what is the Christ light, where is it, how is it perceived, am I that, are you that? So very bluntly, I asked, what about the Jesus stuff? And of course, that's a translated version of the desire to know all that. So it was emanated, for the moment being at least, thumbs up in the affirmative, that it was okay. And that one singular question, that one desire, really the questions were answered. Was there this man, Jesus of Nazareth? Did he walk around and have a ministry, so to speak? Was he divine? Is he divine? Where is he now? In other words, what about all the Jesus stuff? And that was answered. I was able to see that, perceive it. Well, that's what I call the question and answer period. Part of that question and answer period was a realization that I had a choice. And the choice for me was that I could desire to return to normal life. And the instant that I had that desire, the instant that I perceived that or wished for that it would happen absolutely. And that there would be no strings attached, that as soon as I decided that I would wish to return to normal life, it would happen. The other half of that choice was that I could stay and become part of that light. And you have to understand first where I am and what I'm describing. I'm talking about perfection. I'm talking about the heaven state. I'm talking about God. And even though life is beautiful, we've got flowers around us and all kinds of relationships and learning experiences, what I'm really describing is an opportunity to finalize that and move on to the next stage in our lives, which is what we call after death. And of course, to be in that state of perfection is not much of a choice at all. Many other people I've found have a choice given to them, and they feel deep in their heart that they're unfinished business, that they have to come back for a reason, or that they're just not ready to die, or they can't quite handle this much right now, or that there's a selfishness of sorts, meaning that they don't feel it's proper for they to leave their children, or the many excuses why people would desire to return from a clinical death state, or what we call life after death. For me, it was not much of a choice at all. And I do have to interrupt the flow of this description and say that prior to my decision, I had to also have a complete total life review. And you cannot have a decision. A decision will not be allowed without the person's perception of their own life and perceived not only as they have lived it, but perceived with total knowledge, unconditional love, and learning experiences that you have learned subconsciously and superconsciously that you may not be intellectually or psychologically aware of. I had the life review, and I'll describe that in a minute or two, but I want to go on with the choice that I was given. I was given this choice, and only after having a life review, very bluntly, I chose to stay and become part of that light. The problem with that, and trying to sort this out with researchers and trying to describe people like yourself, is that there was a string attached to the decision to stay and become part of that light. And that it was emanated to me that if I decided to stay and become part of that light, that at that point, I would cease to function normally. I would no longer be exactly myself, that I would be an actual integral part of the light, or bear with me if I say that I would be light. And that would disallow me forever after to choose on my own decision, with my own characteristics and character, to return to normal life. So in other words, bluntly and simplistically, I could choose to return to normal life and it would happen. If I chose to stay, I would never be able to choose to return again. Well, now that you understand that, I did choose to stay and become part of that life. And as sorry as I feel for myself sometimes, I don't have any explanation as to exactly how, like manipulatively or physically speaking, exactly how I was able to return to normal life. Or if there's a rationale or a reason or an excuse, I was never told or shown a single or a multiple excuse or excuses for being here now. I'm pleased that I'm here now. I'm satisfied. I'm probably the happiest person that you will ever meet, generally speaking. I have my ups and downs. I have physical problems. I even have to experience major surgery at times. So all the very realistic parts of living are very much back in my life. And I do honestly at times feel a little selfish and a little sad, in other words, lonely for that state of perfection. I'm very eagerly anticipating my natural death. But this, what we call life, is temporary. And if it be for a job that I haven't finished, if it be that I was not really qualified and got kicked out of heaven, it doesn't really matter too much, the rationale behind it. The important point is that I have returned and that I've been very, very fortunate. and being able to facilitate many things that I certainly would never have been able to accomplish. And trust me, I'm not being arrogant or egotistical now, but things that really would not have been able to be facilitated if I had not come back. In other words, with that which I was enhanced by, and with that which I was allowed to learn, I'm trying not to take credit for it. In other words, it's not my fault. It's only Ash's fault. In other words, there also a little phrase that I worked my way up to, and if you've ever heard the phrase that there is no justice in nature, there's only nature. In other words, the lion does kill an antelope, and that's part of the food chain, and it's not the poor lion is going to go hungry or the poor antelope is going to be killed. In other words, there's no justice in nature. There's only nature, and it was by God. And as rational as we try to be and justifiable, you should not question God. You should question yourself and your personal relationship with God, but you should not question the workings of nature to that degree. And you should not make those judgment calls that a rabbit should live, but a mouse should not. And in that capacity, there does not have to be an excuse or a rationale for me to be kicked out of heaven or sent back.
In coming back, however that did happen, are there some people and some situations that you were made aware of that you needed to be here?
Yes, Carol, even you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, are you really asking? I know there's as soon as I returned, was I aware of?
Well, I don't know if it's that or as you're living and you come across situations, you have a sense of where your time needs to be spent or the certain people you want to connect with.
I've experienced a lot of that. I'd never heard of the word synchronicity, as we use it so commonly now. I thought that there were coincidences and things of that nature, that there was a lot of luck. There was some just victims of circumstances. It was very simplistically thought out, if I thought of it at all. And now I see that there are many, many synchronistic series of events that can both lead you, even manipulate you, but you have also free will, so that, in regarding any given circumstance, you can accept or reject anything.
Do you have free will, Tom?
Yes, I do. Ooh, that was a loaded question, and I answered it, and I was smiling. Yes, I really do. As much as any human being, I do. I've been given some knowledge, and in other words, my five senses and several other senses have been enhanced. And I still will agree that I have free will over all of that. But with some of that knowledge, there comes a responsibility too. See, I want to tell you that I have responsibilities, but they're not manipulative. In other words, I'm not a victim, and I'm not being led. Although I realize additional responsibilities. Do I have free will, and can I just stop talking, and can I commit suicide? Can I become lustful? Can I become anything that I might desire to be, or allow myself to fall into? Any of these problems, often problems that people experience on a day-to-day basis? Yes, I can do any of that. I can deplete my physical body, as I have done to a large degree. Some manipulative on my part, in other words, on purpose, and other things that I don't have control over, such as the degree of the injury to my back. I didn't have control over that. It's something that, it was an accident, and I have to take the responsibility for that to a degree, but that wasn't my fault either. So if you think in terms of being a victim of circumstances or being manipulated in that way, well, maybe that's so, but I don't feel that way. I feel as though I am in control of myself, because free will is probably the most powerful gift that God has given the human condition. I've talked about that in great detail before, and I don't think I can talk about that right this moment. There were individuals that I was aware of, and I got, let me first by kind of saying that I was basically a rather ignorant person regarding subjects as we're talking about now. And it was very strange for me to have a very profound perception of individuals such as Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and eagerly anticipating meeting them. I didn't know what city they lived in, but I knew them very well. I knew them as though they were a next door neighbor. And it was shocking and a little sad for me to be told by another physicist that, well, Tom, you talk about them as though you would like to meet them. And I said, well, I would. And then he announced to me that they had died and that they were no longer alive. And of course, through my ignorance, I didn't realize that they were famous physicists and around the turn of the century. So that was a little shocking to me. It was strange. But I had that profound awareness as though they were a cousin or a next door neighbor. That's one aspect. In other words, I was aware of a personal relationship with individuals who had passed on. I became aware of individuals walking around and so on, going to conferences and what have you. I would see someone in a crowded room and just walk over and introduce myself, in other words, socially, politely, but profoundly knowing that I had to say something specifically to that individual. Sometimes it would be only that information, that whoever that person is over there, I must tell them about the Meissner effect or some subject. And then it's even come to pass, like I just mentioned, the Meissner effect, which is in physics. And I might mention it out loud and then have to go to a book and look it up. So it might be very important for me to say something about it, which, let's say spiritually, I might have been aware of. But then in my own personal interest, I would have to look it up to find out what it really meant. So does that mean that I was sent back with bits and pieces of information to help other people? Sure. I mean, okay. I've already accepted that. And it's happened so many times that it's not just a fluke or a coincidence, or I'm not playing a super head game or even a psychic head game, which is possible. You can be psychic to a degree and know enough to play what I'll call head games or mind games, just for the purposes of sensationalism and even to make a profit or excuses and rationales like that. And I haven't really fallen into that. I'll call it a trap for me. In other words, that would be a trap for me. I would not wish to do that. And in 11 years, I haven't done that. Should I just briefly say, because you were talking about the experience, summarize that I had a complete life review. I was given additional information. I blended into that light. And in the very last stage that I can possibly remember with any accuracy, it was a return trip through the tunnel. Again, with no excuses or rationale, but and I slammed back into my body. At the same time, the truck was lifted off me, and I was revived.
Okay, Tom, going back to your reference to God's unconditional love, how does that relate to sin?
Sin? Sin. Yes, I tried that one. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I if somebody else would have asked me that question, if it'd be a question, somebody else would have asked me that, I would have probably, like one-on-one, I would have asked them, what is your definition of sin? And work off of that. I think the difference between ourselves and as we, and I'm kind of stereotyping and generalizing everybody, that we have a perception of sin, and of course it's self-imposed, even if it be a cultural conditioning. In other words, you're taught that's good, that's bad, and that's so bad that it's a sin. as opposed to something that's not quite as bad. It's not really a sin, it's just a little bit bad. Further than that, you do have natural instincts, such as if you do something to hurt someone's feelings, you will intuitively know, even ahead of time, that this will probably hurt someone's feelings. Or if you do act it out or say it or do it, you will then experience that this hurt a person's feelings. And then you have immediately two choices. You can block it, psychologically shun it, and justify it, and do all those things and justify that, no, you didn't sin or you didn't do a bad thing, that it was either justifiably bad or that it was just plain bad, but so what? Or totally block it. That may or may not be a sin at that point in time. I think the biggest problem with sin is that I'm talking me for me, and therefore generalizing about everybody, is that the things, the sins of omission and commission that we perform or that we are responsible for in a lifetime are vastly unperceived. In other words, the numbers of inadequacies, the numbers of perpetuated things, in other words, to perform or to do something that is sinful or negative or bad, is that we don't even perceive them on a conscious level.
I guess what I'm trying to relate to is that most of us were brought up to feel that when you pass over, there'd be this scale that this big bad
judgment.
Person getting into judgment, right?
Sure.
That this is what you did good and this is what you did bad, and based on all of that, you would either go to heaven or go to hell. And in terms of what you experience with God's unconditional love,
I think that as opposed to having a transitional state that would include an aspect of purgatory or a hellish experience or a time frame, if you will, that you don't go right from this light, the express lane, right into the light or into the heaven state, that can be perceived with some degree of accuracy as a cause and effect relationship from ill-gotten gains or negative deeds, things of that nature. But generally, I was rather shocked, if you will. I mean, one of the most profound things I learned is that there was no such thing as hell. That the things that I had been taught and shown were terrible deeds, and that don't you dare say or do this, or don't you dare think this way or act this way, is that that was not, in fact, a sin, and it wasn't perceived as that. Plus, the fact that God, certainly the God that I experienced, is an all-loving God, and that even though there are very few rare circumstances where in a transitional state or after death, I'll say it that way, after death, there can be a reparation or a further learning experience. It's not from condemnation. It will be more perceived as just a magnificent, loving gesture on the part of God to give you not really a second chance, but to give you the opportunity for a learning experience to overcome our human inadequacies, be they psychological, spiritual, or any other way, physical, all of those things.
In getting into the word judgment a little more, as we kind of do with each other a lot, could you talk to the spiritual teacher who is giving you guidelines or whatever? How might you say this? With a sense of, if you don't follow their teaching, that there's some sort of a judgment that goes along with it. How do you see a spiritual teacher?
Yeah, generally, I know that idea. There's most churches. There's a good example. You can always pick on churches because their dogma and their documentation and things like that are in print. And you can point to them, you can translate them, and so on. Yeah, I think that's generally unfortunate because, with the best of intentions, the original fathers, if you will, or creators of the religion or the ism, had good intentions, And then the first time they ran into, say, a teenager or a child who was just persistent in dancing when they're supposed to be sitting meditating or praying or doing a ritual, and they simply want to dance instead and be obnoxious by their standards, when in fact, in God's infinite wisdom, to have a child jump up and dance would be beautiful to me. Sure, again, with the best of intentions, they've set these rules and regulations which often limit creativity and actuality, which means real truth, to the point where it's been degraded to the point of, if you don't do this in this exact way, you will be punished. The original sentences that were like that is, if, for instance, you don't maintain a degree of realization of the spiritual level, or your own personal spirituality, or your own personal relationship with God, then you will pay the price of being without that. Meaning that you will be only physical, or only psychological, or only spiritual in a perverted way. Now that's that's a relative statement. It only have to be perceived by the individual. But that's a little confusing perhaps. So, for instance, for you to only be physical and saying, well, this feels good, so it's okay to do it. And then a physical stimulus of some sort. And then that's more of this is better. And to do this all the time would be perfect or great. And that's not the true human condition. The human condition is a combination of diseases and states of ease. Feelings of ecstasy, feelings of remorse and depression. It's a combination of all those things, oftentimes in cycles, oftentimes spontaneous. And that's the true human condition. And nobody should be forced to do without that. There's a lot of philosophy mixed in that statement right there. And, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing what I'm saying. And, you get off on many, many tangents. I'm trying not to do that right now. Philosophical issues. But it boils down to what is right and what is wrong. Well, the fact that we live in a structured society of any sort, be it local or the entire society of the Big Blue Marble, of all of us on the Mother Earth, we do have to have certain rules and regulations. Otherwise, we'll self-destruct. There are people who are greedy, more greedy than you and I. There are people who are manipulative. And again, don't be judgmental. It may or may not be their fault. They may, by an act of free will, desire to be this. And that intermingling of all of we, sometimes it can boil right down to what they call, or what we call, good and evil. And there is that constant mixture and therefore battle going on. Well, the way I experienced my life review, it was not any of that. There was no two-sided thing at all. It was this intermixture of me perceiving every single thing that I had done in my life. Whatever age I was at 9 years old, I had the perceptions of a 9-year-old. At 20-year-old, at 33 years old, same thing. The perceptions as I experienced it, any event, time frame, aspect, feeling, learning experiences, just exactly the way it was in what we call reality. But at the same time, I would perceive each of those things in extreme slow motion, meaning that I would be able to count the number of eye blinks, which are unimportant philosophically, but they may not be. In other words, were you so nervous that you constantly blinked out of just nervousness while you talked to your teacher or talked to your friend when you were 9 years old? Or did you blink because you had an injury to your eye? Or did you blink because of the brightness of the sun today? So, I mean, there can be cause and effect relationships with everything. Your attitude alone. Also, with any single event or any time frame equally, I had the experience of perceiving that. Bear with me if I say this, because I really wish to be so humble is to not ever have to say this or claim this. But I, in my life review, had the perceptions of as in the eyes of God, or as in the eyes of Jesus Christ, or the Christ light, and had the perception of unconditional love. Unconditional love, a quick explanation. Many people right away think in terms of things that are not unconditional love, but are very divine and high states of love. The love of a mother for a child, perfect example. To use that analogy, perfect example, it is not unconditional love. It's one of the most conditional loves that there is. The fact that the mother will put herself, her own life, her own well-being in harm's way to protect her child or for the betterment of her child. Very divine as it is. Beautiful motherly love. But that is a condition. That is an extraordinary condition. One of the ultimate conditions. That's conditional love. It is not unconditional love. The love that I'm talking about is the love that God has for us. Agape. Agape is a perfect word. Look it up in the dictionary, look it up in theology and so on, or wherever you can find it. Look it up. Agape is God's unconditional love for that which is the human condition. And in that capacity, God does not say, that is bad, that is good. God may possibly say, that is history, but only has the capacity to love that which God created. It's a paradox, and we Westerners, especially Westerners, have a difficult time dealing with a paradoxical anything, even a two-sided paradox, let alone a multi-sided paradox. Should I say more about unconditional love?
No, I don't think so. You've been known to say that you'd be comfortable in any church or synagogue. So in terms of all the different choices of religions and everything.
Okay, well, of course, God loves the human condition. Part of the human condition for right now is Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Shintoism, Catholicism, all the isms and all the ologies. God loves all of those people. Are the Christians more accurate? Are they on a faster road, a better ladder type escalated spiritual awareness? Not necessarily. I know some very Christian people who don't know the word Christ. I've come to know them. I mentioned the word Christ to them, so that's no longer true, as a matter of fact. No, I can feel very comfortable in a ritual, a religious ritual. What takes place or what do I do that some people may not be able to do? I wouldn't even brag about it. It's just that I can see into now the spiritual aspect or the spiritual desire, the spiritual fulfillment of any, within reason, realistically, any bona fide or loving religious ritual. If it be a Catholic Mass, if it be in a Taoist temple, a Buddhist temple, a festival of some sort, shul on Friday night, or any of those things, that they are, in all of their humility and humbleness, reaching for answers and praying and loving upwardly toward God. If it does not include Christ and the Christ light, I can still see the love, the desire for love, the desire for knowledge. You see, to say this more sentences, I'd be contradicting myself, which I don't mind doing anymore. That used to really bother me, to contradict myself. And I really love it when I do contradict myself, somebody call me on it or say, well, you've just said the opposite. For instance, can a person who has never mentioned the word Jesus Christ be a Christian? The answer is yes. Yes, God doesn't have, well, you are my select group and you are not. This common phrase that we hear so much about and so many people have found solace in following and perceiving born-again Christians, meaning a select group. I, for one, can very well be a born-again Christian and yet not go to one of their churches. They would argue that is impossible because they are the select few and everybody else is wrong and bad. No, the God that I experience is all-encompassing. It's much greater than that. The God that I experience is not that narrow-minded.
Being that this would be considered a New Age conference, I at one time had the opportunity to go to an analysis of what the New Age is. And one of the comments was that the New Age people think that God is within. And therefore, if you think God is within you, you think you're God, which means you become selfish because you aren't accountable to a God. How can you
Yeah, here we go again with psychical conditions. You know, we are often very psychical in many ways. I'm not just talking about a year in time or an age from around the chronological age from man of 9, then 12 or 13, then 33-ish, by the way. And then again in what they call the golden years of, it was originally 50, 55-ish, and now it's extended up to 65 and 70-ish, chronologically speaking. And of course, what it is, it's that combination of psychological, philosophical, wisdom, spiritual by way of religious teachings, religious fervor, therefore spiritual realization. All those things. Wow, I lost my train of thought. We're talking about...
We're talking about thinking that you're God, or...
that combination of that which we all are. I'll talk about the problem of that analogy, or that way of thinking. To see someone in utter ecstasy at the edge of the lake or at the edge of the ocean with their arms stretched out and yelling, declaring out to the universe that I am God. That can be egotistical. It can be detrimental. It can also be extremely, profoundly ecstatic, divinely ecstatic, and a profound realization that the I, me, the I am within me is an aspect of God, and that atonement or at-one-ment or attunement. And if in fact, with a mixture of my psychology, philosophy, and so on, physical being can be attuned with and at one with that profound realization of that universal God, not necessarily that God just within me, but that God that is within me and equally, simultaneously, homogeneously in the entire universe, that's very profound and beautiful and divine. So again, it's an individual thing that you and I, at any time that we may come to realize such a thing, say to teach this to a young, ignorant, innocent child, to say such a thing at the edge of the water would be ridiculous. It would be stupid, in my opinion. To watch that child, observe that child, and possibly even teach that child at a certain time in their lives they may feel this and experience this and wish to express such a thing, then that would be okay. It's a judgmental thing again on our part, and then that would be okay. To take upon yourself that you answer only to yourself and to that God within you, do you have any idea what you're taking on yourself? And should I ever dare do that? Well, if you look at it that way, you say, do I have that kind of responsibility? Can I handle such a thing? And the true answer, the real answer is no. A vast, vast majority of the people cannot be responsible a day later or a month later, having had that very pure divine realization, but cyclically, they'll be in a depressive state, a selfish state, a less humble state, any kind of normal conditions, the human condition, and then that's no longer true. It can be true for one moment and not true for the next.
So if we were to go within for inner guidance when we hear many different kinds of religious thoughts and philosophies and whatever, to see what truth is for us, is that sort of a safe measurement? I know some people go to a particular book or a particular learned person.
I'd say generally, I personally have recommended and recommend that. You learn something new. You read a new philosophy. You experience a new religious technique, or I'm lost for the right
meet
word.
A new teacher.
A new teacher. Any of those things, or just have some type of an experience. If it be just reading a book, and I don't mean to say just reading a book or learning anything new, sure. Don't decide right then and there, that's it. Do you know how many times I've yelled to my wife Elaine and a degree of ecstasy and say, this book is perfect, this book is it's a quantum physics book, but it says something about the existence of God. It says, all right, well, this was my perception of that book at that time. 5 years later, I laugh hysterically at the loving, rather pure childishness of the way I thought that was perfection. And we have these stepping stones. So whenever you say this is it, be careful, because a day later, a month later, a year later, you're going to be saying the same thing at a different intensity, a different level, if you will, a different perception of the same thing. So be careful of that. But yes, one thing that I do recommend is that you have certain amount of knowledge, scholastic learning, teachers, teaching. You learn from religious instruction, learn from spiritual conferences, and so on. Sure, get excited. Give yourself the opportunity to be ecstatic whenever you can. I mean, do that. I recommend that. But 48 hours later, or the next day, or a couple of days later, be alone, be still. Don't have the cultural conditioning. Don't have your mother or mother-in-law saying, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Because they may be wrong. I mean, you may be suddenly experiencing, my God, this is beautiful, this is okay. And culturally and even socially, it may always remain unacceptable in that framework, but for you, within you personally, it may be very helpful, it may be very fulfilling, and very wonderful. So yes, be alone, be still. If you meditate on a regular basis, if you fervently pray, any of those conditions that can bring you to aloneness. And I don't mean depressive aloneness. I don't mean loneliness. I mean aloneness. To be still, don't have music playing, don't have anything. Be alone and be still. And then, love yourself. Be as unconditional as you can be. Surround yourself with the new knowledge. Be aware of the new knowledge and sort of throw it up in the air, so to speak, or say, is this the egotistical me just wishing for sensationalism? Is this the spiritual me just so hungry for food that I'm grasping at crumbs and I'm not seeing the full loaf? Is this me reaching for a single grape on a vine when the fruit of the tree is knowledge and not fruit at all? It's never a vine or a tree. That the fruit of knowledge is knowledge. It's the comprehension of knowledge. And that's a never-ending cycle as long as we're still in the human condition. A never-ending cycle. I don't care if you're an ignorant, retarded, lowly person, by you set your own standards, or if that you are an intellectual, or if you are a spiritual leader, or if you it doesn't matter who and what you are. It's a never-ending cycle. The greatest Rashi, the greatest sage, the saints, the few saints that I have a perception for and am aware of, and I'm declaring that also by saying it that way, that aware of, I'm talking that are alive, in other words, incarnate and alive right this minute, right now, they are in the same cycle, and they're learning. They don't know all, they are learning. And that is a never-ending cycle, and it should be dealt with very carefully. As soon as you label yourself, you have limited yourself. Most often.
In that the New Age is almost passing through enough years to be considered the New Old Age or the Old New Age, would you like to address your favorite word called nab?
Nabs. Yeah, which is a very loving gesture describing this phrase New Age, New Agers. The space music, mood music is often referred to and called New Age music. All right, and a great deal of that, unfortunately, I'll be clear, and at least some of it is referred to by me and several other people as nabs, New Age bullshit. And sure, that's the caution. Again, the ism, theology, the subject matter, is it purely sensationalism? Is it real truth? And I don't mean I want it to be this way, therefore I've decided it will be this way. I mean real truth. Very often truth really hurts our feelings. In other words, I don't really want this to happen to me, and yet it has to. That's a learning experience in itself. Be very careful of such things. To don new robes is fun. It may even be exciting as the dress-up type stuff. But be aware that when you don new robes, you are learning something. And that until you become, by your own standards, familiar with it enough to see it only as robes and not as a title and as an attainment. Just be cautious of that. Enjoy. I have a little sticker on my refrigerator that says, enjoy life. This is not a dress rehearsal. And that's really the point I want to make regarding that.
So it's hard sometimes to be discerning and not be judging, you know?
Right.
I mean, you have to discern for yourself what's right for you, at the same time not judging the other person as being wrong.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. That's right.
So it may be right for the other person.
It is, right. Also, who is your teacher? Don't answer that. I mean, who is your teacher? Well, did I learn from garbage men? Now, see, just by saying that, right away I've stereotyped. Well, now the people that don't know me that well, yes, I have learned some of the most profound, divine, and wonderful things from one of the most stereotypical garbage men. And I'll even give his name, George Burmeister. I do a little thing with children, and I use that same name because of the divinity that I have a perception for his name, God rest his soul, he's passed on. George Burmeister was a garbage man and worked with me for 3 years as a garbage man in Monroe County. And we were one of the best crews that were garbage men. We went to the houses and collected the garbage. So what does that have to do with teaching and divinity? George Burmeister was a very unique individual, as most of us are. And in that time frame, when I had the company of George Burmeister as a personal friend, and now I can give him a title of a teacher, I learned extremely profound things about society, about, just the entire gamut of subjects. Be careful of who your teachers are. You can learn some of the most divine things from garbage men and people with badges and slash marks on their sleeve and doctorate's degrees. And I'm not making fun of any of those people. God bless them for what they have accomplished. But be careful, because the degrees don't make the teacher. The teacher, that yellow aspect of a person's being, is the teacher condition. And the lessons to be learned may require math or language and other things. I'm afraid we're going to be drowned out by sound. So let's cut. Take a look.
I'm going to throw out a couple of words to you that I personally have never heard you discuss. One is capital punishment.
Oh, just that? Okay,
right.
I'll respond to that. Capital punishment in a newly formed and rather archaic, and I don't dare use the word simplistic, society had value. In that in any given society, there are circumstances which the society needs to be protected from, with the inability to incarcerate or protect or chain or prevent. It was a viable option. To further answer this question, listen to the whole answer, not just the sentence that I, Tom Sawyer, totally disagree with capital punishment. I do disagree that it is an unfortunate situation where we, human beings, have to purposely take the life of another human being. That is admitting the worst failure of the society, or we as human beings. It is denying large amounts of our capacity for compassion, for understanding, for knowledge, for reparation. I should qualify myself to say that I have visited Attica Prison on several occasions. I heard a comedian once talking about it, and he said that he had been to, I might have been Attica also, but a major prison. And then he said, thank God for prisons. All right? I have a tendency to agree with that unfortunate as it may be, there are individuals, there are human beings that are incarcerated in prisons such as Attica. And for our society and my children and my well-being, thank God that they are in there behind bars and I'm able to walk down the street rather comfortably. Okay, now that we've got onto that subject, to annihilate that person, to put that person to death for crimes committed or for the prevention of further crimes committed, that's unfortunate. We have the technology right now to not just do a lobotomy. Many people have that fearful thing of back as early or as short a time ago as the 1950s, where they would do a frontal lobotomy and destroy a person's brain and make them into practically a vegetable, and that they would just be zombie-like and walk around. And some people think that that's a viable option for somebody as a child rapist, a murderer, a mass murderer, who psychologically will obviously do that again. If they are released into society, they will do it again, and all the psychology schools in the world are not going to repair that person. They're not going to make that person not be a psychopathic murderer. Okay? To kill that person, we have the technology right now to do a form of brain surgery to alleviate pressures, situations, and I'm hinting toward a partial lobotomy even. In other words, make that person physically unable to perform a certain act or to function in a way where they can intellectually, shall I say intellectually or psychologically, create the situation in their lives and in their mind that makes them the perpetrator of a rape, a murder, something of this nature. It has never solved the vindictive, in other words, we've never realized satisfaction that that bastard is dead now, and that makes me feel better. So much for the phone call.
Right.
Yes, everybody's fine, and my mother says hello. Yeah, for that person to be dead and have that satisfaction of, say, the father of a child who's been murdered, saying, I'm glad that the person is dead. Well, that's superficial. That's surface-wise. And what he's really saying is his frustration and misunderstanding, bear with me if I say that, his misunderstanding and his frustration for the perpetrator to do such a thing is now gone. And in his mind, he's telling himself that that can never happen again. Now, that is correct in a way, because if the person is dead, they're not going to very well kill another, murder another person, or rape another person, or something that is under the heading of why do we have capital punishment, and to solve what problem. It doesn't solve the depth of the problem, of the deep-rooted frustration of the loss of a loved one by way of one of these crimes. And it does not really upgrade society. You will never be able, I shouldn't say never say never, but you, for right now, for this day, if you went and killed all the psychopaths, first of all, you're never going to find them. And as you proceed in doing this facilitation, there will be creating by the society alone additional psychopaths. In other words, you will never be able to weed out
the killer.
Right. You'll never be able to accomplish that goal. So if you look at the society as a whole, the society as a whole has not solved anything. It's a Band-Aid process that cannot work. Because you cannot kill or execute all of the people that are a detriment to society. So you're never going to be successful that way. Toward that success, what do we do with a Charles Manson? What do we do with an Adolf Hitler? What do we do with a child rapist, convicted, and so on? I think the most intelligent psychiatrists, the most intelligent, and there are very few by my standards who are intelligent enough to admit openly that the probability is that we will never change a murderer from the capacity of murdering again. We can teach them remorse, we can teach them that it stems from an unfortunate childhood, and all these things that are just add to the frustration. Very little true understanding is gained, in my opinion, by the statements and so on that, well, this person murdered because his mother beat him as a child. I mean, that's rather shallow. That's not the it's not the only thing that created that person to becoming a criminal. So the problem isn't solved with performing capital punishment. To incarcerate these people costs a lot of money. Are we a society that can afford it? Well, if we can afford $50 million for an airplane, that doesn't necessarily work, and if it is ever used, it'll be too late to have satisfaction in the society anyway. We can spend $50 million for a single airplane for that. Can we afford to incarcerate the people that we cannot address and cannot answer and cannot repair? Right? Yes, we can. We can afford to build facilities suitable enough and technologically sound enough to incarcerate such individuals for the moment being. If we do not have the technology to perform physical type or biochemical or biological reparations within their body, when you have a cancerous state on your arm, it may have to be cut away and allow a skin graft and so on to be generally a whole person, a well person. We're learning in psychological terms that you can be manically depressed, and with certain therapies and possibly chemical interventions and so on, you can biochemically repair yourself. Extended, that is available to us today. I'm not saying that in the local hospital right now they can do that, but it really hasn't. There's been no money poured into that. There's been no major research involved in that. By major, I mean worldwide. Worldwide attention to say, we have this very serious problem. Here's monies for research. What can and can't we do? And of course, it goes into the criminal justice system, that what can you do to a person? Isn't it ironic that we can legally kill a person, called capital punishment, but we cannot legally inject them with the serum that may possibly cure them? I mean, it's very ironic. But no, I think that capital punishment is incorrect, because there are other ways of protecting society. To make one feel good because a person is dead, having created a heinous crime, that's too shallow, and that person needs to work out their depression or their anxiety regarding their opinions of society themselves. Wow.
How about the word abortion?
Yeah, it's in the news lately. All right, right off the bat, I want to make it clear, because I have skirted the issue, and anybody of any intelligence has to be very careful talking about the subject in general, because first of all, it's an emotional thing. And if I say that this poem is beautiful and you don't understand it or like it, how am I to convince you that I'm okay and I'm right for liking it? You may think that I'm a jerk for liking such trash. Okay, since it's generally an emotional issue and a spiritual issue, a religious issue, some spiritual and religious, other people, it's a religious issue, and they're not even aware of any degree of spirituality within their life. God bless those people. But generally, I think that an abortion, in other words, and again, let's just zero in on the mother-to-be, or the woman who is carrying this fetus, this zygote, or this fetus, extraordinary situation that we're not prepared to deal with culturally. There hasn't been a culture that has really dealt with that accurately at all in history, as far as I know. That is one of the most unfortunate situations that they have the option for currently. It will be rather devastating. If the person is a materialistic person and they solely judge that this will interfere with my career, with my profession, and that I don't want a child, I don't want a baby, and I don't care about anything else, they will experience the emotional, the psychological, and to a degree spiritual aspects of postpartum situations. And if not right away, then later. And if right away, possibly those feelings, those real experiences will fade in time, though psychologically they can even block them out, but they will, and they should be told that they will have those experiences. I know this also from talking with several people who have gone through this. All right, now, the religious aspect. I could right away pick on Catholicism because they're about the most famous right now, saying that no matter what, this is just absolutely wrong and you will be a sinner and you will be condemned to hell for ever having done such a thing. Well, philosophically regarding that, I've already criticized aspects of the Catholic Church, which, by the way, I still attend and still enjoy. There's got to be a realization, or there is a massive realization by almost everybody. And then to overcome a cultural conditioning is very difficult for people. But when it comes to the point where the Pope says you have to do it, or the Pope says you don't have to do it, well, that's not just the Pope. That's a hierarchy of a business, the business of the Catholic Church. I'm picking on them. That was the business of a particular religion. And that is men and women, mostly men, who are deciding this through various rationales, spiritual realizations, and mostly, I'm sorry to say, business propositions. In other words, how do we control the masses? Do we give this kind of power to our followers, to our parishioners? Do we count on their emotions and their compassion for life, that they will realize such situations as, no, I will have to interrupt my career or my schooling or my selfishness, and not being judgmental when I say that, I'm using dictionary definitions, part of my life right now because of the circumstances that has either, and be careful how I say this, happened to me or that I have created in my life. In other words, was it a rape situation in a pregnancy from that? That has a tendency to give different circumstances than, no, I was only lustful and I didn't allow myself the time or the intelligence, if you will, to protect myself with means of contraception. And that's a whole nother subject too, but fits into the abortion issue. Because very bluntly, a vast majority of abortions are for fertility control. And for somebody to just say, I don't want to address fertility at all, I'm only telling you that abortion is killing a child to be or a human being to be, that's rather shallow-minded because they're only pointing the finger and they're name-calling, and they're not solving a very real problem. Abortions are forced on young children. By children, I'm talking about 12 and 15-year-olds, where, well, not to worry, we'll give this child an abortion and we'll do what we can to make her comfortable with the rest of her life. That may be advantageous. It may be successful to whatever your measurements are or whatever my measurements are regarding that child's expected life, meaning the young child who got pregnant. And of course, the issue of that we have potential. Well, I really would like to have some of the people who argue pro and con and are only steadfast in their position to start addressing potential. I mean, potential, human potential. And I'm not just saying human potential that a zygote or a fetus will potentially become a viable, self-sustained human being. Yes, we all know that. Most of us are familiar with that. And there is potential there. But the potential of the individual, the pregnant mother, right? And what is the potential as a mother to be? What is the potential of, after having had an abortion, for that mother to ever be a mother again? Or, again, potential. I don't want to give any titles to what my expectancy of any given individual is. I'm actually talking round and round circles. I'm just bringing up additional subject matters that have to be addressed to address the general issue of abortion, the abortion issue itself. My opinion is that such a thing should be dealt with as detailed as possible. I think that any individual who is considering an abortion as an option at all, I mean, even considering it, even thinking about it. Now, there's not desiring abortion, but having become pregnant are being frustrated by seeing in the newspaper the word abortion and are totally disgusted by that. I think that it's the responsibility of each individual to not be narrow-minded and say, well, I've heard of abortion, but my church says I shouldn't do it, so I don't want to hear any more about it. That's being very narrow-minded, and that's cheating yourself. That's cheating yourself of understanding the situations of people, and even gaining compassion for people who unfortunately make mistakes. And again, I'm not just saying that anybody who has an abortion has made a mistake. Not claiming that, because I won't speak for every individual. I know of many circumstances where there have been mistakes made, and the person has had an abortion and is sorry for that. Do they die a month later? No, they live on, and their potential is often enhanced culturally, enhanced spiritually, enhanced religiously, having gone through this quote-unquote mistake. Right? And for them, it was a mistake. It's something that now in their human condition that they are working out. And I'm not giving them an excuse for what they have accomplished in their life. I'm just saying that this is a real situation, and there are not one or two, there are millions and millions. I do think that it should be considered as an absolute last resort for anything. I think it should be considered as an absolute last resort for fertility control. I mean, I don't like the idea. In other words, intuitively, inherently, it's not correct. I don't like the idea. As far as an option for an incestual pregnancy or as a result of a rape, it should not be totally ignored. What are the options? What are the potentials? And again, I'm going strictly against the philosophy and so on of, again, mostly Catholicism and religious fervor that potential for life is there for life. Also, you have to realize that you and I are not the society. We're an integral part of it. And if you are feeling democratic at all and you say the majority rules, you can understand that philosophically. And the sign of the times is that unfortunate decisions are made that may very well be popular at the moment, but in 100 years from now will become to be realized as a horrendous mistake. Did the Roman Empire become extremely lustful generally? Was it popular and okay culturally speaking, and therefore by demand religiously speaking, by pressures and so on, that sexual orgies and lustful situations, because again we're dealing with abortion and sex therefore, and did it become the norm? Did it become acceptable to lose your virginity to a stranger, to all of these various issues that are intertwined and then ending up at the general subject matter of a conceivable abortion? And the fact is that yes, they did that. Yes, they allowed themselves over 100 years in time or more to culturally condition themselves to say, well, this is okay, this is okay. Well, this is an answer to this. This is a quick fix, a quick answer to this situation. And to also allow their emotions, in this case, a lustful emotion, or the things that rule their lives, become overwhelming in their lives, and therefore have their society become overly anything. There's a great danger in that. And of course, the Roman Empire was defeated from within. And did they honestly allow themselves to maintain their minimum spiritual awareness? No, they didn't. They justifiably, step by step, and of course we can be judgmental and say it got worse and worse and worse, but at any given time in that society, they said, we're getting better and better and better. We're enjoying more of life. We're having more states of ecstasy. When states of ecstasy are a benefit and joyful and all that, but a continuous state of ecstasy can only be experienced after this human condition, not during. Wow.
Okay. We've heard a lot about the energy influxes into the planet and the changes of the ozone layer and radiation and mutation. How do you see life being affected by it?
Yeah, certainly is being affected. In the last 10 years, I shouldn't brag because I shouldn't lay claim to a realization, but I've seen several changes, and I can be proud and brag and say that those changes have not been as bad as the scenario was shown to me, not only as part of, bear with me if I say this phrase, but a flash forward of my life review.
Mhm.
I know that's almost a contradiction of terms, but as part of my life review, there was possibilities and probabilities of future scenarios. Some people might not understand that, but bear with me. As part of that, there are future scenarios and even bits and pieces of knowledge of future events. In other words, precognitive, absolute future events that were extremely negative by my standards. In other words, extremely detrimental to the environment, detrimental to we people. In fact, as we approach the turn of the century, in a time frame ranging from the last 10 or 11 years and extended through the turn of the century and even beyond. Hypothetically, let's limit it to, say, the year 2150. And in that time frame, there's been many changes. One of the delightful things that I want to share with you is that regarding the atmospheric pollution, the chemical pollution, the even the cultural conditionings, forms, if you want to consider that, forms of pollution. Are we allowing ourselves to become more lustful? Are we allowing ourselves to become greedy? Are we allowing ourselves to be and enjoy being a materialistic? Is this really the me generation? Give me more. And if I have more than you, does that make me better than you? All that's pollution. It's forms of pollution. Yeah, we've done a pretty good job in the last 10 years. I have played a part, well, actually a hands-on part of chemical pollutions. I've documented places and situations in the Niagara frontier, on the Niagara River, in the Rochester area, places in Italy that I've never been to before, various things that I have actually facilitated. In other words, a momentary event, a singular thing, a bunch of 55-gallon drums that I became aware of in one way or another. Chemical pollution of the human condition in Italy that I became aware of. What did I do about it? I did something about it. Did I right away call Greenpeace and take up a club and go and smash the chemical plant that was there? No, there's various other ways. Would that have changed the society? It would have made a news article for that day. But would it have changed the attitudes that create the situation of, well, let's get rid of this anywhere. It doesn't matter as long as we make a profit. The probability is that would not have changed that. So in an ongoing basis, in a flowing way, there is a time when you have to take up the garden hose and water this down and be careful how you do it. There's a time when you say, no, I really don't mind driving my car less if it's going to enhance the atmosphere. And that if my car pollutes this much, let me make a loving gesture and walk 10% of that distance until the car manufacturers, can come up with electric cars and so on. And there's all that sort of stuff. All that's been going on, and I'm glad to say that it's been going on at an accelerated rate. There have been a couple of major events that have come to pass that the event itself, precognitive in its origin, as I experienced, did not come to pass. Now, is that a contradiction of terms? In a way it is, but through acts of free will and the free will of mankind, something that is historically precognitive, in other words, it will happen on this day at this time, and it will take place like this. Well, through free will and enhancements and so on, as paradoxical as that sounds, or as contradictory as it sounds, the event in fact did not take place. I'm thinking of one particular event right now, but there have been several. So all that is upbeat, and I say thank you for everybody who's participated, and thank you for listening right now and coming to this realization that any one of us can make a difference, and collectively we have to make a difference. The negative side